Riley adjusted the strap on her navy blue backpack as she stepped into the first-class cabin of Flight 227, the early morning light filtering through the airplane windows and bouncing off the polished chrome. The cabin smelled faintly of leather seats and brewed coffee. Naomi followed just behind her, gripping her debate folder and glancing up at the uniformed flight attendants with practiced politeness. They wore matching navy blazers over their white button-down shirts, khaki skirts, and debate pins gleaming proudly on their lapels, symbols of countless hours spent refining arguments and rebuttals. Their dark hair was neatly braided, their shoes polished. They looked like they belonged. At least, that's how they felt when they boarded. Riley spotted their seats, 1A and 1B, right at the front beside the window. She smiled and nudged Naomi with a subtle elbow. Naomi returned a quick nod, the smallest trace of a smile tugging at her lips as they slid into their seats. Their father's words echoed in Riley's head. "You don't shrink to make others comfortable. If you earn the space, fill it." She settled back into the plush leather, confident and composed. Then came the voice. "Excuse me," said a woman sharply. "Where did you two get these seats?" The sound cut through the low murmur of pre-flight boarding. Riley looked up to see a flight attendant standing before them, her name tag reading Kendra Lowell, her posture stiff, eyes narrowed. She held her clipboard like a badge of authority. Naomi's eyes met Riley's. She already knew where this was going. Riley sat up straighter. "These are our seats," she said simply, her voice firm but polite. 1A and 1B. Booked ahead, paid in full. Kendra gave a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't ask what seats you think you're in. I asked where you got the tickets." A hush fell over the few passengers already seated. A businessman in 2C looked over his newspaper. An older woman with silver hair in 3A glanced over her glasses. No one said anything. Just eyes. Watching. Naomi reached into her folder, sliding out the printed boarding passes and offering them without a word. Kendra glanced at them, barely, then gave a low, dismissive scoff. "Anyone can print a fake ticket," she muttered. Riley blinked. "You can check your system," she said, her voice steady. But Kendra didn't move. She looked past the girls toward the galley and signaled. Moments later, a uniformed TSA officer stepped through the curtain into first class. Tall, built like a linebacker, his name badge read Logan Pierce. He didn't look at the girls when he spoke. "Stand up, please," he said. Naomi stiffened. Riley didn't flinch. "Our names are Riley and Naomi Bennett," Riley said. "Our father is Malcolm Bennett. He booked these tickets. If you check the manifest—" "Let's go," Logan interrupted. He reached for Riley's backpack. "You're causing a disruption." Naomi stood now, her hand slipping into Riley's. "We're not causing anything," she whispered. Logan didn't respond. Instead, he gestured toward the aisle. "This isn't up for debate." Riley's fingers curled into her palm. Debate. That's what this entire trip was about. They were headed to Washington, D.C. for the Capitol Debate Showcase, one of the most prestigious high school events in the country. A chance to earn scholarships, recognition, respect. Instead, they were being pulled from their seats like intruders. As they stepped into the aisle, a man in 4D leaned toward his seatmate and muttered, just loud enough to be heard, "Kids like that always stir up trouble. One of them probably stole my wife's phone last month." Naomi's steps slowed. She turned her head toward him, voice quiet but cutting. "We're not your past mistakes, sir." The woman beside the man, an older lady in a lavender cardigan, didn't speak, but her expression hardened. Still, the cabin remained silent. As the girls were led down the narrow aisle, Naomi kept her eyes forward. Riley's shoulders were set, her chin high. Their matching blazers felt heavier now, less like armor, more like targets. In the galley, Kendra turned toward the cockpit. "Handled," she said. Captain David Warner, eyes on his pre-flight checklist, gave a small nod without looking up. "Good call," he muttered. "Let's keep first class clean." In seat 3B, Margaret Hill, a retired schoolteacher with a sharp memory and a slower reflex these days, exhaled deeply. Something about the situation gnawed at her. But the moment to speak had passed, and silence had won again. At the back of the cabin, a young woman with short curls and a tan blazer raised her phone discreetly. Shayla Morgan, freelance journalist, had seen enough of these moments to know how they began and where they sometimes led. She tapped her screen. A quick caption. 2 black girls kicked off Flight 227 for sitting in first class. #Justice for twins. The upload bar crawled upward. 5%, 10%, 100%. The video was live. Back in the terminal, Riley and Naomi were seated in a small side room with hard plastic chairs and the kind of cold lighting that made everything feel like a mistake. Logan stood near the door, arms crossed. "When someone in uniform gives you an order," he said, "you follow it. That's how we maintain order." Naomi glanced at him, but said nothing. Her fingers danced across her phone screen. Riley replied evenly, "Order doesn't mean silence, and it doesn't mean you get to ignore the truth." Logan scoffed but didn't respond. The silence thickened. "Did you tell him?" Riley whispered. Naomi nodded. "Dad knows. He's on his way." Meanwhile, back on board, the atmosphere remained stiff. Kendra returned to the galley with an air of finality. "They're gone," she said. Don Kent leaned back in his seat, arms crossed. "I feel safer already," he said aloud. No one responded. In the back, Shayla watched her video tick past 10,000 views. Comments flowed in like water through a burst dam. "Sue them." "Unreal. Still happening in 2025. "Who were they? Name the airline." Margaret looked toward the aisle, then at the manifest clipped beside her tray. Her lips thinned. Something didn't sit right. Still, she said nothing. Not yet. The plane door was still open. The flight hadn't taken off, but something else had. Outside, in the main terminal, a black SUV was pulling up fast. Inside the holding room, Naomi checked her phone again. "He's close," she said. Riley gave the smallest nod. "Good," she said. "Let them keep talking. He'll hear everything." The holding room was stark. White walls, buzzing overhead lights, and chairs that looked like they'd been designed to make people uncomfortable. Riley and Naomi sat side by side, their blazers still perfectly in place, their hands resting quietly on their laps. Across from them stood Logan Pierce, arms folded, stance wide, his presence more about dominance than protection. "You girls need to understand something," he said, his voice clipped. "There are rules on planes, procedures. When a flight attendant feels something's off, we follow that instinct." Riley kept her eyes level. "Instinct isn't evidence." Naomi didn't speak. Her thumbs moved across her phone, tapping, scrolling, typing. "Authority matters," Logan continued. "When someone in uniform tells you to move, you move." Riley met his gaze without flinching. "Respect goes both ways." He opened his mouth to reply, but Naomi interrupted softly. "He's 5 minutes away." Riley nodded. "Good." Logan looked between them, clearly unsure what they meant, but he didn't ask. Back on the plane, tension hovered like humidity. Margaret Hill had unbuckled her seatbelt and stood quietly, watching the aisle. She'd taught middle school for 30 years and recognized injustice when she saw it. The problem wasn't recognizing it. The problem was speaking up before it passed you by. Just 2 rows ahead, Donald Kent leaned toward the window, satisfied. He spoke to the man next to him without looking up. "Same thing happened in Houston. These kids think everything's theirs. World doesn't work that way." The man didn't respond. He shifted uncomfortably. In the back, Shayla Morgan refreshed her screen again. The short clip, Riley holding up her ticket, Naomi saying, "These are our seats," was climbing fast. 15,000 views. 20,000. She whispered to herself, "Keep going." Shayla wasn't new to this. She'd filmed evictions, protests, traffic stops. But this one felt personal. Because these weren't grown men in hoodies. These were 2 girls in uniforms, doing everything right, and still being treated like they didn't belong. She pulled her laptop out of her satchel and began drafting a longer caption. 2 black girls removed from their first-class seats despite having valid tickets. The flight attendant refused to check. Security removed them without verifying. It's 2025, and this is still flying. She tagged the airline. She tagged major outlets. Then hit post. Back in the galley, Tiana Brooks stood frozen near the beverage cart. Her heart pounded. She'd been training at Sierra West Airways for just under 3 months. She knew the chain of command. She knew not to interfere. But something about Kendra's tone, the lack of documentation, the way the girls had presented their tickets. Calm, respectful, organized. Tiana had seen the passenger manifest that morning. She remembered 2 names near the top: Riley Bennett, seat 1A, Naomi Bennett, seat 1B. She reached for the printed list from her folder, scanned it again. There they were, plain as day. She walked quickly to the galley, found Kendra reviewing coffee supplies. "Excuse me," Tiana said, voice low. Kendra didn't look up. "They were listed," Tiana said. "Riley and Naomi Bennett. I double-checked. The seats were real." Kendra turned slowly. "Tiana," she said, "you're still new." "I know," Tiana replied. "Then let me be clear. You observe. You don't correct. But I said enough." The final word hit like a slap. Tiana stepped back, throat tight. Behind her, passengers whispered. Phones flickered in hands. One man across the aisle mouthed, "I think I saw that clip." Shayla's video had hit 30,000 views. In the holding room, Logan glanced at his phone. Notifications buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check them. Naomi did. "They're watching," she said quietly to Riley. "Video's gone viral." Riley didn't smile, but there was something new in her eyes now. A glimmer. She adjusted her blazer and crossed her legs. Logan shifted. He could sense something had shifted, but not what. "You kids really think you can outsmart procedure?" he scoffed. "You think a little phone video's going to change anything?" Naomi didn't respond. Instead, she asked, "Why didn't you check the manifest?" Logan blinked. "It wasn't my job. I was told they were unauthorized." "By whom?" Riley asked. He didn't answer. Outside the holding room, a low murmur began to build. 2 gate agents leaned over a monitor. The Twitter feed on the screen scrolled rapidly. #JusticeForTwins, #Sierra West, fail, #Let Them Fly. Inside the plane, Margaret finally moved. She turned to the aisle, gestured to a passing crew member. "Can I speak to someone in charge?" The crew member hesitated, then motioned toward the galley. Margaret approached Kendra directly. "I'd like to know why those girls were removed." Kendra didn't flinch. "Security protocol. They didn't offer ID." "That's not what I saw," Margaret replied. Kendra turned away. Margaret returned to her seat, her hands trembling slightly. Nearby, Don Kent watched. "You gonna make this a race thing now?" he asked, half joking. Margaret's voice was low. "It already is." Shayla captured the exchange. She didn't speak, just posted, "Passengers now questioning staff. Video update coming." In the holding room, Naomi's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "He's here." Riley adjusted her seat, exhaled slowly. "Let them keep talking," she said. "They'll write their own story." Logan's arms dropped from their folded position. "You don't know how the world works," he said, more defensive now. "You want first-class treatment? You earn it, not by waving a printout." Riley turned to face him fully. "Our names are in your system." He said nothing. Naomi's phone buzzed once more. "He's coming down the hall." Back on the plane, the mood had shifted entirely. Shayla's post had reached 40,000 views. Multiple outlets had tagged Sierra West Airways. Some passengers now spoke openly about what they'd seen. "I just don't get why no one asked for proof," one woman whispered to her husband. "They didn't even ask for ID," another man added. Margaret leaned toward Don. "You know what the problem is?" she asked quietly. Don raised an eyebrow. "You see girls like them and assume the worst, because of how they look." Not what they've done. Don looked away. I'm just being cautious, he mumbled. Shayla caught that too, her caption this time. Caution isn't an excuse. It's just a mask for bias. And then footsteps. Heavy, fast, purposeful. The door to the holding room opened. A man stepped in. He wore a slate-gray suit, no tie, a subtle watch, and carried a quiet authority like a second skin. Behind him trailed a younger man in glasses holding a tablet, Isaac Reed, and a third figure, familiar to Riley and Naomi, Tiana Brooks. But it was the first man that made Logan stiffen. Mr. Bennett, Logan said, I didn't realize— You didn't check, Malcolm replied, calm but cutting. Let's talk about why. He turned to his daughters, eyes softening. You okay? Naomi nodded. We're fine. Riley added, We told them. They didn't listen. Malcolm faced Logan. Why didn't you verify their names? Why didn't anyone check the manifest? I was told they didn't belong in first class. By whom? The flight attendant, Kendra Lowell. Malcolm turned to Isaac. Show me the manifest. Isaac tapped his tablet, turned the screen. Clear. 1A, Riley Bennett. 1B, Naomi Bennett. Booked under Sierra West corporate account. Verified. Cleared. Malcolm looked back at Logan. So tell me again, what part of the system told you they didn't belong? Logan had no answer. Tiana stepped forward, her voice cautious. I tried to tell Kendra. I checked the manifest myself. She wouldn't listen. Malcolm nodded. Thank you. Then to Logan, you'll escort me back to that plane now. Logan opened the door. As they exited, Naomi looked to Riley. You ready? Riley didn't hesitate. We never left. Malcolm Bennett didn't walk fast. He didn't have to. With every step through the corridor of Terminal D, the air around him seemed to shift. It wasn't the designer suit or the way his shoes echoed softly against the polished tiles. It was the steadiness, the weight of a man who had spent his life climbing ladders built without him in mind, only to own the building by the time he reached the top. Behind him, Isaac Reed tapped urgently at his tablet, scrolling through timestamps and pulling up the full reservation records. Beside him, Tiana Brooks moved with quiet resolve, still dressed in her flight trainee uniform, eyes forward, no longer hesitant. Logan Pierce walked several paces ahead, silent now, his shoulders hunched slightly, as if trying to shrink out of sight. The entrance to Gate D-17 came into view. Passengers nearby quieted as they recognized the man in the suit. A few lifted phones. Some simply stepped aside. Malcolm spoke without raising his voice. Is the aircraft door still open? Yes, sir, Isaac replied. Good. They reached the threshold. Logan stepped aside. Malcolm nodded once at him. Stay here. The TSA officer stopped short. His jaw flexed, but he said nothing. Inside the aircraft, passengers turned. The hum of conversation faded. Phones were lifted again. Margaret Hill sat upright in her seat. Shayla Morgan's fingers flew across her screen. He's here. The CEO. Hatch Justice for Twins. Don Kent leaned slightly forward in his seat, lips parted, unsure if he should speak or disappear. In the galley, Kendra Lowell stood with her arms crossed. She was reviewing the coffee inventory again, trying to look composed, in control. She turned when she heard the steps. The moment her eyes met Malcolm's, her face drained of color. Mr. Bennett, she stammered. I didn't know you were— Where are my daughters? She opened her mouth, closed it, gestured weakly toward the aisle. They were removed, for safety reasons. Malcolm didn't respond. He stepped past her. The cabin was silent, except for the soft whir of air vents. Riley and Naomi stood near row 3 beside Margaret, who had risen to greet them again. Their uniforms were still neat, their postures still upright, but there was exhaustion in their eyes. He reached them in 2 strides. You okay? He asked. Riley nodded. Naomi said, They didn't believe we belonged. Malcolm turned slowly to face the cabin. He didn't raise his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, I'm Malcolm Bennett, CEO of Sierra West Airways. This morning, my daughters were removed from their assigned seats in first class, seats I personally booked through our corporate channel. They were not disruptive. They were not a threat. They were simply young and black. And that, it seems, was enough. A quiet murmur rippled through the cabin, heads nodded, eyes lowered. Kendra stepped forward, trying to reclaim ground. "Sir, I was following protocol. They didn't offer ID." "You didn't ask," Malcolm replied, calm as ever. "You didn't check the manifest. You didn't verify anything. You saw them. You judged them. You acted." From the cockpit, Captain David Warner appeared, his expression guarded. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "our crew has a responsibility to act when they sense a security issue." "You're absolutely right," Malcolm replied. "Your responsibility is to ensure every passenger is safe, and that includes ensuring your crew doesn't exercise prejudice under the guise of instinct." Warner's jaw tightened. "We acted out of caution." "No," Malcolm said, voice low. "You acted out of assumption." Shayla's stream ticked past 60,000 views. Margaret Hill stood once again. "I watched it happen," she said, loud enough for the cabin. "They did nothing wrong. They were quiet, polite, confused. The only disruption came after they were removed." Kendra shook her head, eyes darting. "This is being blown out of proportion." Malcolm looked at her. "Intent doesn't erase impact. You may not have meant to humiliate them, but you did." Tiana stepped forward now, holding the printed manifest. "Mr. Bennett," she said gently, "their names are here. Seat 1A and 1B. Cleared. Booked 3 weeks ago." Malcolm nodded. "Thank you." He turned to Isaac. "Document all of this." Isaac already had. Suddenly, Don Kent cleared his throat. "Are we really making this a racial issue?" he asked, voice strained. "Maybe it was just a mistake." Margaret turned toward him. "You assumed they were trouble. You said so, remember?" Don looked away. Malcolm faced Kendra and Captain Warner. "You are both relieved of duty. Effective immediately. A formal investigation will follow." Kendra's voice cracked. "You can't do that." "I can," Malcolm said, "and I just did." Captain Warner stepped forward, defiant. "This is still my aircraft." Malcolm's tone sharpened slightly. "And you've failed your duty today. You failed my daughters." He looked toward the front. "Tiana, who's next in line for this flight?" Tiana's voice was steady. "Lindsay Cole is backup. Co-pilot Reggie Banks is inbound from D.C. Call them in." Shayla's stream ticked up again. 75,000. 80,000. Passengers began clapping, not loudly, but steadily. A woman in row 4 said, "About time someone said something." Malcolm turned back to Riley and Naomi. "You ready to board again?" Riley didn't miss a beat. "We never left." As Kendra and Captain Warner gathered their things under watchful eyes, Logan Pierce entered the aircraft with a clipboard. He didn't speak, just followed orders. Isaac filmed. Margaret leaned toward Naomi and whispered, "You girls remind me of my students, smart, brave, unshakable." Naomi smiled faintly. Riley nodded at her father. "We're good." Malcolm nodded back. "Then let's take our seats." And just like that, they did. The aircraft door closed with a soft hiss. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was no longer tense, but it wasn't relaxed either. It hovered in that fragile space between relief and reckoning. Riley and Naomi were back in their seats, 1A and 1B, their backs straight, their hands folded quietly in their laps. The hum of the engines vibrated beneath them, but they didn't flinch. Across the aisle, Malcolm sat in 1C, his body turned slightly toward them, his eyes steady. He wasn't checking emails. He wasn't on a call. He was present, entirely. Lindsay Cole, the new flight attendant, moved down the aisle with quiet grace. No unnecessary smiles, no forced chatter, just calm, efficient professionalism. When she reached the front, she paused. Miss Bennett, she said, nodding to each girl by name. Would you like anything to drink before takeoff? Naomi blinked. Riley looked at her father, then back at Lindsay. Water, please. Coming right up. No judgment, no doubt, just service. At the cockpit, Reggie Banks ran through the pre-flight checklist. His voice came over the intercom a moment later. Good morning, everyone. This is First Officer Banks. We're on schedule for a smooth flight to Boston today. Estimated flight time is 1 hour and 55 minutes. Sit back, relax, and thank you for flying with Sierra West Airways. In row 5, Margaret Hill opened a small notebook and scribbled something down. Shayla Morgan leaned over from the adjacent row. What are you writing? She asked. A letter, Margaret replied. To corporate, to whoever needs to hear it, to thank them, and to ask them what comes next. Shayla nodded slowly. Mind if I sign it too? Margaret smiled. That's the point. The cabin settled. Luggage was stowed, belts clicked. The aircraft began its slow taxi. At cruising altitude, Riley turned to her sister. You okay? Naomi nodded. I'm just tired. Me too. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Riley pulled out her debate folder and opened to a half-marked speech outline. Naomi stared at it. We're still going to present? Riley shrugged. We have to. It's what we came for. Naomi leaned in, read a line, then shook her head. No, she said. Start with this. Injustice isn't always what's done. It's what's assumed. Riley smiled. That's better. Behind them, Don Kent sat still, fidgeting with his watch. The words from earlier, Margaret's call-out, Malcolm's voice, Naomi's sharp question, played in his head like echoes. He glanced toward the girls. They weren't glaring at him. They weren't whispering. They were studying, learning, moving forward, and he felt small. Across the aisle, Malcolm's phone buzzed once. A message from Isaac. Statement ready. HR looped in. Legal cleared. Draft posted for review. Malcolm typed a single line. Add this. This isn't about image. It's about integrity, and we won't look away. He hit send, then leaned back. Further down the aisle, Lindsay Cole stepped quietly into the galley and handed a slip of paper to Tiana. They're calm now, Lindsay said. But they shouldn't have had to be. Tiana unfolded the paper. It was a note Riley had written on the back of a boarding pass. We didn't come to fight. We came to fly. Tiana stared at it, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her badge holder. At the back of the cabin, Shayla posted another clip, just a still shot this time, of Riley and Naomi in their seats, reading, heads bowed slightly toward one another. They didn't yell. They didn't run. They didn't demand. They just stayed. That's power. #Justice for Twins. Fly with respect. In the front row, Malcolm finally spoke again. Riley, Naomi. They looked up. You did everything right. Riley nodded, unsure of what to say. Naomi said softly, I don't think it mattered. It did, he replied, because they didn't take anything from you. Not really. You're still here. You still belong. And now, everyone knows it. The plane soared higher. The sunlight poured through the windows. A few passengers clapped softly when Lindsay passed out drinks, not because of the soda, but because of the shift. The sense that this flight was no longer just a flight. It was a line in the sand. When they landed in Boston, the applause was louder, not for the touchdown, but for what it represented. As they filed off the plane, passengers nodded to the girls. A young man in a college sweatshirt handed Riley a folded note. She opened it later. My little sisters look like you. I hope one day they walk as strong. Margaret handed her petition to a corporate agent at the gate. Already signed by 22 passengers. More were asking for digital copies. Shayla snapped a final photo as they exited into the terminal. They walked in with backpacks. They walked out with a movement. Malcolm placed his hands on his daughter's shoulders as they stepped into the terminal lights. They didn't smile. They didn't need to. They were already heard. Naomi adjusted her blazer collar for the third time. Riley nudged her. "You look fine." Naomi exhaled. "I know, I just want to make sure they see me as serious." "They will." They stood backstage at the Boston Youth Equity Summit, behind a dark curtain that separated them from a sea of folding chairs, high school students, educators, local journalists, and a few news cameras. The summit had been planned for months, but after the flight incident went viral, organizers reached out to invite the Sanchez twins personally. Riley hadn't wanted to accept. Naomi did. "We didn't ask for this," Riley had said. "No," Naomi replied, "but we're here, and people are listening." Now, their names were printed on the event program. Featured voices, Riley and Naomi Sanchez. When the host called them out, the applause was steady. Not loud, not exaggerated, just real. The kind that comes from people who already knew what they were walking into. The twins took their places behind the podium. Naomi spoke first. "My name is Naomi Sanchez. I'm 14. I didn't come here to go viral. I came here to fly to a debate. But then someone decided I didn't belong, that my skin, my age, or my silence was suspicious." She paused. "And that moment is the reason I'm here." Riley stepped up next to her. "We were told we looked out of place, but we were in the right seats. We were polite, we were calm, and we were still treated like intruders." She looked out at the crowd. "People keep saying we handled it well, that we were strong, but here's the thing. Black girls don't exist to be resilient. We deserve peace, too." A hush fell over the room. Naomi picked it up again. "If we hadn't had our dad, or the cameras, or the platform, would anyone have believed us?" Someone near the back murmured, "Facts." She nodded. "We're not the first. We won't be the last, but maybe we can be a reminder that bias doesn't have to be loud to be dangerous." The girls ended their speech not with a call-out, but a call forward. "We're not here to accuse," Riley said. "We're here to change what happens next." The applause swelled. No ovation, just deep agreement. Malcolm watched from the side, arms crossed, not with worry, but with pride. In the lobby, Shayla Morgan was already prepping for a follow-up video. She'd been asked to moderate a panel later in the day and had requested to interview Riley and Naomi live. Across from her, Margaret Hill sat at a high table, sipping tea, watching the room. Her petition had reached 1,200 signatures. She'd also received 2 requests to speak at local universities. "I'm retired," she kept telling people. But apparently, justice didn't care about her retirement. Tiana Grant arrived just in time for the next panel. Her manager had given her the day off after she sent in a detailed, bullet-pointed account of what happened during Flight 203. She'd added timestamps, witness names, even referenced airline policy. "I can't fire anyone," she'd said in her email, "but I won't forget." Now standing at the back of the summit hall, she smiled as she watched Riley and Naomi answer questions from a group of students. They weren't rehearsed, they weren't defensive, they were honest. One boy asked, "How do you stay calm when people look at you like you don't belong?" Riley shrugged. "You remember who you are, not who they say you are." Naomi added, "And you breathe, and you don't let them take your joy." The boy nodded slowly. "That's hard." "It is," she replied, "but it's worth it." Back in Atlanta, Don Kent sat in his office, staring at the news alert that had just popped up on his laptop. A local station was covering the summit. The headline read, "Teen Sisters Speak Out After Airline Incident Sparks National Outcry." Below it, a quote from Naomi, "We didn't want attention. We wanted a flight." Don leaned back in his chair. In his inbox, a draft apology email sat open, addressed to the twins. He'd been writing it for 2 days. Still only had 2 lines. "I judged you. I was wrong." He hadn't hit send yet. At the Sierra West HQ, Malcolm reviewed a draft of the new Staff Equity Protocol. 3 pages. Written by Camilla. Edited by HR. Shaped by the legal team. He scratched a note in the margin. Include real scenarios, not just theory. Include Flight 203. He closed the folder and looked up at the wall monitor. On it, a muted broadcast replayed footage from the summit. Riley, hands steady. Naomi, eyes focused. His girls, his warriors. That night, back at the hotel, the girls sat on the bed with takeout boxes between them. Lo mein, teriyaki, fried rice. Their phones buzzed nonstop. Riley put hers on Do Not Disturb. Naomi scrolled through a message from Harper, the journalist who'd first shared their clip. "You're changing things. Keep going." Riley set her fork down. "Do you think this really matters?" Naomi looked at her. "You mean the summit?" "All of it." Naomi didn't answer right away. Then she picked up her drink, took a sip, and said, "Yeah, I think someone out there is watching us. Not to follow, but to feel like they're not alone." Riley looked at her sister and smiled. "Okay," she said. "Then let's keep going." The newsroom lights were dimmed, but the cameras were rolling. Riley and Naomi sat side by side across from a host in a gray suit and perfect posture. The set was sleek, blue backlight, polished desk, overhead screen glowing with the segment title, "The Flight That Sparked a Movement." It had been 2 weeks since Flight 203. 2 weeks since the video, since the speeches, since the apology, since the reckoning, and now the girls were here on national television, not as guests of sympathy, but of substance. The host leaned forward. "Let's go back to that day, when you were pulled from your seats. Did you think anyone would believe you?" Naomi answered first. "No, not really. People don't believe girls like us. Not unless it's recorded." Riley added, "Even then, they ask what we did wrong." The host nodded, his face serious. "How did it feel when your father showed up?" Naomi smiled slightly. "Like the room shifted." Riley grinned. "Like we could breathe again." He turned to the screen behind them, which now displayed a still image of Malcolm standing in the aircraft aisle, eyes locked on the flight attendant. "Your father said this wasn't just about you. It was about what happens when no one checks their bias. What do you want people to take away from this moment?" Naomi didn't hesitate. That checking a ticket is not the same as checking a person. Riley followed. That power doesn't excuse assumption, and silence helps no one. Backstage, Malcolm watched from the green room, arms folded, lips pressed. Camilla sat beside him, freshly promoted, and now officially part of the internal review board. She nudged his arm. "They're incredible," she whispered. He nodded, eyes never leaving the screen. Later that night, the clip from the interview was reposted by several major networks. One outlet captioned it, "They didn't yell, they educated." The interview sparked new dialogue online. Hashtags like #BoardWithBias and #equity in the air trended again. Former passengers shared quiet stories, some good, many not. Riley scrolled through a few, then set her phone down. Naomi looked up. "Tired?" "Just full." Naomi tilted her head. "Of what?" "Thoughts, feelings, pressure." Naomi chuckled softly. "Welcome to being black and seen." They lay in their hotel beds, each under a warm blanket, each staring at the ceiling. Naomi broke the silence. "I keep thinking about the girls we sat next to on our last flight. The ones from Chicago?" "Yeah. Remember how quiet they were, and how fast they moved when the flight attendant walked by?" Riley nodded. "I think that used to be us." Naomi rolled onto her side. "Not anymore." 3 days later, Sierra West Airlines released its official Path Forward Plan, a 5-page public document signed by Malcolm Sanchez and the board of directors. It outlined the new anti-bias training program, the formation of a passenger advocacy committee, and a national listening tour led by staff and passengers. Camilla's name was printed in the list of program leads. At a press conference, a reporter asked her, "What's the goal here?" She replied simply, "To make sure what happened to Riley and Naomi never gets written off as a misunderstanding again." The next question went to Malcolm. "Some say this was an overreaction." He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "If accountability feels like overreaction," he said, "then the problem isn't the reaction, it's what we've been allowing until now." The soundbite was clipped, captioned, and shared more than 500,000 times. One commenter wrote, "This CEO just changed how I see corporate responsibility." Another replied, "Nah, his daughters did." Back at school, Riley and Naomi returned to campus quietly. No media, no ceremony, just backpacks and books. Their debate coach met them at the door. "You girls ready for finals?" Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to ask about the interview?" "I already saw it," the coach said. "Now I want to see your prep folder." The girls laughed. Later that week, their principal called a school assembly. Not to celebrate, but to challenge. She stood on the stage with a single quote projected behind her. "We don't just argue for truth, we live it." Riley Sanchez. She looked out at the students. What happened on that flight didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened in a country where assumptions too often speak louder than facts. She gestured to the crowd, and we all play a part in changing that. When Riley and Naomi walked the halls after, more students than usual nodded to them. Some stopped to say thank you. Others just offered a glance, but the kind that meant, "I saw. I get it." That was enough. Meanwhile, Don Kent finally sent the email. Subject line, "I owe you this." Body, "Riley, Naomi. I was wrong. I let fear speak louder than fairness. I let assumption walk ahead of truth. And I let silence hide behind uniform. That won't happen again. I hope one day I can do more than say this. I hope I can show it. Don Kent. He never expected a reply. 2 days later, he got one. From Naomi. "Mr. Kent, thank you. Accountability doesn't erase what happened, but it opens the door to what happens next. We walk through that door every day. Hope you'll join us. Naomi S." As spring turned to summer, the Sanchez twins were invited to speak at more panels. They turned most of them down, except one, the National Student Equity Forum in D.C. There they stood before a crowd of nearly 3,000 young leaders. Riley closed the speech with, "We didn't ask to start a movement, we asked to be seen. But maybe the two go hand in hand." Naomi added, "Because sometimes just staying in your seat is the most powerful thing you can do." The crowd rose to its feet. 6 months later, fall arrived quietly. The air had shifted, not just the weather, but something deeper. You could feel it in how people stood, how they looked at each other, more alert, more aware. In a modest auditorium in Minneapolis, rows of high school students filed in for a talk. No camera crews, no media frenzy, just a plain banner above the stage that read, "Fly with dignity, stories that stay with us." Riley and Naomi took the stage together. They didn't bring a slideshow. They didn't read from a script. They just told the story, not with anger, but with clarity, with honesty, with purpose. They spoke about what it felt like to be doubted, to be silenced, to be looked at like a problem before a person. Then they spoke about being heard, about the ripple effect, about how a moment of humiliation became a movement for change. Naomi glanced at the crowd. "We don't want your sympathy," she said. "We want your sight." Riley nodded. "We're not asking you to feel sorry. We're asking you to look again, and then act different." Afterward, students approached them, some with tears, some with nervous smiles. One girl said quietly, "That happened to my brother. No one believed him." Another boy, white and unsure, said, "I never thought about how it feels to be assumed wrong." Riley offered a simple answer. "Now you have. That's a start." Across the country, Sierra West Airlines had quietly transformed. Camilla Morris, now Director of Culture and Training, stood in front of a group of new hires in a sunlit conference room. A screen behind her read, "More than protocol, seeing the person." She walked slowly, hands clasped, eyes focused. "We train for emergencies," she began, "for turbulence, for technical failure. But the biggest danger in the air isn't mechanical." She paused. "It's assumption." She told the story, not the viral one, but the real one. What it felt like to be silenced, to be told, "Stay out of it," and how she chose not to. When she finished, one of the new trainees raised her hand. "What made you speak up?" Camilla smiled gently. "Because silence never saved anybody." Later that day, as she walked through the terminal, a pilot nodded at her and said, "Respect, Director." She smiled, not because of the title, but because she'd earned that nod. Malcolm Sanchez returned to routine, sort of. He still handled board meetings, still signed contracts, still dealt with logistics. But every Wednesday, without fail, he blocked 2 hours on his calendar. Field listening. He'd sit in break rooms, at gate desks, in cafeterias. No tie, no tablet, just ears. He listened to crew stories, baggage handlers, janitors, ground crew, flight attendants. Not as a CEO, as a person. "Tell me where it's broken," he'd say. Sometimes it was about policy, sometimes about people, sometimes just about being tired. But they talked, because now they knew they'd be heard. One afternoon, an older employee who'd worked for the airline 30 years leaned over and said, "You made it okay to say something now." Malcolm nodded. "We're just getting started." And then there was Justin Harris, 6 months sober, 3 months into weekly sessions with a community dialogue group. He rarely spoke in the first few meetings, just listened. One night, he finally did. "I spent a lot of years thinking gut instinct was wisdom. Turns out it was just fear with a good disguise." The group nodded. "I don't want to be that man anymore." No one clapped, but someone put a hand on his shoulder. That meant more. Olivia Smith wrote a book. What I Didn't Say at 30,000 Feet hit the shelves quietly, but didn't stay quiet for long. It was part memoir, part challenge. She wrote about silence, about complicity, about growing up in a time when you didn't question authority, and how that time needed to end. A line from Chapter 3 went viral. "The cost of speaking up is discomfort. The cost of silence is someone else's dignity." She was invited to speak at schools, libraries, even airline HQs. But her favorite moments were the letters, from kids, from teachers, from a girl who said, "Now I know what courage looks like." Harper Thomas launched the Fly with Dignity campaign full-time. It became more than a hashtag. It became a platform, a hotline, a mentorship program, a space for stories. Passengers shared moments, some gut-wrenching, some triumphant, all real. The account's bio read, "Because change doesn't land by accident." One night, Harper stood on a TEDx stage in jeans and sneakers. She said, "Viral doesn't equal victory, but visibility, that's the first step. And after that, it's choices, daily, quiet, human choices." She ended with a picture. Riley and Naomi, seated in 1A and 1B, looking out the plane window. Caption, "This is what legacy looks like." As for Riley and Naomi, they flew again. Many times. No security stares, no second glances, just boarding passes scanned, seats taken, tray tables up. Sometimes a passenger would recognize them. "Are you?" "Yes, thank you. Always." One morning, as they boarded a flight to a college visit, the flight attendant smiled at them and said, "Welcome aboard, Miss Sanchez. Your seats are ready." Just like that. Normal. Right. Fair. They sat down side by side. Naomi looked over. "Feels different now." Riley nodded. "Feels earned." And as the plane lifted into the sky, above the clouds, above the noise, above the doubt, They didn't need a spotlight. They had something better: their seat, their story, and the truth that got them there. Some stories don't end when the plane lands. They echo like a soft bell in the back of your memory, calling you to look again, to listen closer. I still remember that picture: two young black girls sitting in their first-class seats, heads held high after the world had tried to shrink them. It wasn't anger in their eyes. It was clarity, that quiet kind of power you only get from telling the truth without raising your voice. There was no big speech at the end, no dramatic music, just calm, deliberate choices. A father who stepped in, not with fury, but with conviction. A young flight attendant who chose truth over comfort. Passengers who realized silence was no longer neutral. And two girls from the black community who showed the nation what grace under pressure really looks like. The lesson here isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who we are when no one is watching. It's about how we treat the people who don't look like us, don't speak like us, or don't seem to fit where we think they should. The truth is, dignity isn't granted by a uniform, a seat number, or the color of your boarding pass. It's something we carry, and it shines brightest when tested. The black community has long been asked to prove its worth twice over just to be seen as enough, but every time they rise, peacefully, powerfully, they remind us justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it just refuses to be moved. And maybe that's what stays with me most. Not the headlines, not the viral videos, but the image of Riley and Naomi, back in their seats, calm as the sky, not demanding space, but claiming what was already theirs. Like a lighthouse that doesn't chase ships, they simply stood. And in doing so, became the light. So if you ever find yourself in a place where someone's presence makes you uncomfortable, ask yourself, what story am I telling myself about them? And is it based on truth or assumption? Because like the old saying goes, a quiet act of courage can light the way through even the darkest journey. Take a moment today. Think about what dignity looks like, not just when it's easy, but when it's tested. And if this story touched your heart, consider passing its warmth to someone who needs it, especially those in the black community still waiting to be seen fully. We don't all fly first class, but every one of us deserves to be treated like we belong. And sometimes the smallest act of humanity can help an entire community breathe a little easier.